The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered timber building that served as Medicine Bow's general store, and Clara Kingston gripped her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles turned white beneath her traveling gloves. She had rehearsed her new identity 1,000 times during the 4-day journey from Cheyenne, each mile putting precious distance between herself and the life she was desperate to forget. It was September of 1878, and the Wyoming Territory promised her exactly what she needed, a place where nobody knew her real story, where she could become someone entirely different, someone respectable. She stepped down from the coach onto the dusty main street, her sensible brown traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of dirt despite her best efforts to stay clean. Medicine Bow was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the Union Pacific Railroad line like children huddling close to their mother. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow that caught the afternoon sunlight and gleamed like a promise of something pure. The driver handed down her trunk with a grunt, and Clara paid him with coins she had counted and recounted during sleepless nights in roadside stations. This was everything she had left in the world. She had told the employment agency in Cheyenne that she was a widow, that her dear husband had perished in a mining accident back east, and that she sought a position as a seamstress in a respectable town where she might rebuild her life. Every word had been a carefully constructed lie, but she had delivered it with such conviction that even she almost believed it. The truth was far messier, far more shameful, and if anyone in Medicine Bow ever learned what she had really been doing in Denver for the past 3 years, she would be ruined before she even had a chance to begin again. The general store's door swung open, and a woman with silver-threaded hair and a kind face appeared on the porch. "You must be Mrs. Kingston. I am Margaret Sullivan. Welcome to Medicine Bow. We received your letter last month, and I must say we are desperately in need of someone with your skills. The nearest seamstress is in Rawlins, and that is a full day's ride." Clara forced herself to smile, to project the quiet dignity of a woman who had suffered loss but maintained her composure. "Thank you so much for the opportunity, Mrs. Sullivan. I am most grateful for your generosity in arranging lodging for me as well." "Think nothing of it, dear. The room above the shop is small but clean, and you will find it adequate, I hope. Let me help you get settled, and then we can discuss the work. Half the women in this town have clothing that needs mending, and there is talk of several weddings this winter. You will not lack for employment, I assure you." As Clara followed Mrs. Sullivan inside, she caught sight of a man across the street, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty chaps and a hat pulled low against the sun. He was tying his horse to the rail outside the saloon, his movements economical and sure, like someone who had performed the same action 10,000 times. Something about the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with absolute confidence in his own body, made her heart skip unexpectedly. She looked away quickly, reminding herself that she had not come here for romance. She had come here to disappear, to become respectable, to leave behind the person she had been forced to become. The room above the general store was indeed small, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small stove, and a window that overlooked the street. It was the cleanest, most honest space Clara had occupied in 3 years, and she had to blink back unexpected tears as she set her carpetbag on the bed. Mrs. Sullivan tactfully pretended not to notice her emotion, and began explaining the arrangement they had discussed by letter. Clara would pay for her room and board by doing mending and alterations for Mrs. Sullivan's customers, keeping a percentage of the fees for herself. It was honest work, respectable work, and Clara swore to herself that she would never again do anything that would compromise the fresh start she was creating. That evening, after Mrs. Sullivan had left her to unpack and rest, Clara stood at her window and watched the town settle into dusk. Lamps were being lit in windows up and down the street. Men were heading home from work or into the saloon for their evening drink. A dog trotted purposefully down the middle of the road, heading somewhere with what looked like important business. It was all so beautifully ordinary, so blessedly normal, that Clara felt her chest tighten with longing. This was the life she wanted. This was the person she wanted to be. She did not see the tall cowboy again until 3 days later, when she was in the general store helping Mrs. Sullivan arrange a display of ribbons and lace that had just arrived from Cheyenne. The bell above the door chimed, and Clara looked up to see him entering, hat in hand, his hair dark and slightly too long, his face tanned from countless hours in the sun. He had gray eyes, she noticed, the color of storm clouds over the mountains, and when those eyes met hers for just a moment, she felt something electric pass between them before she quickly looked away. "Good afternoon, Mr. Northwood," Mrs. Sullivan said warmly. "What can we do for you today?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Sullivan. I need some thread and a few needles if you have them. I have been trying to repair a torn saddle blanket, but I am making a mess of it, I'm afraid." His voice was deep and pleasant, with a slight western drawl that suggested he had been in Wyoming territory for some time. "Perhaps Mrs. Kingston could assist you," Mrs. Sullivan said, and Clara wanted to sink through the floor. "She is our new seamstress, and she is extraordinarily skilled. Mrs. Kingston, this is Kade Northwood. He has a ranch about 6 miles north of town, runs cattle and horses." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes again, to offer a polite, professional smile. "I would be happy to look at it, Mr. Northwood. Saddle blankets take quite a beating, I imagine." "That they do, madam." He was studying her face with an intensity that made her nervous, though not in the way men's attention usually made her nervous. There was nothing predatory in his gaze, nothing calculating. He simply looked at her as though she were interesting, as though he wanted to understand what he was seeing. "I appreciate the offer. The truth is, I am hopeless with a needle. I can stitch up a horse or a cow when needed, but fabric defeats me entirely." Mrs. Sullivan laughed. "Bring it by tomorrow, Mr. Northwood, and Mrs. Kingston will see what can be done. Now let me get you that thread and those needles. The good steel ones just came in." While Mrs. Sullivan bustled off to gather his supplies, Kade Northwood stood there, hat in his hands. Clearly trying to think of something to say, Clara focused on arranging the ribbons, hoping he would not ask her questions about herself, about her past, about the husband she was supposed to have lost. She had her story memorized perfectly, but something about this man made her afraid that he would see through her lies, that those gray eyes would pierce straight to the truth she was hiding. "Medicine Bow must seem quite small after wherever you came from," he said finally. "Do you find it suits you?" "I find it peaceful," Clara replied carefully, keeping her eyes on the ribbons. "Sometimes peaceful is exactly what a person needs." "Yes," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her glance up at him. "Yes, I suppose it is." Mrs. Sullivan returned with his items, and he paid and left, nodding politely to both of them. Through the window, Clara watched him mount his horse with easy grace and ride north out of town, dust rising behind him in the golden afternoon light. "He is a good man," Mrs. Sullivan said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Lost his parents to fever when he was just 17. He has been running that ranch alone for 8 years now, building it up from almost nothing. Works harder than any 3 men I know, and honest as the day is long. Half the unmarried women in Carbon County have set their caps at him, but he seems content with his horses and his cattle and his solitude." Clara said nothing, but something in her chest tightened at the information. A good man. An honest man. The kind of man who would have nothing but contempt for her if he knew the truth. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to Clara's new life that felt almost miraculous in its simplicity. She woke each morning to sunlight streaming through her small window, dressed in one of her plain, modest dresses, and went downstairs to begin her work. Women brought her everything from torn petticoats to wedding dresses that needed altering, from men's shirts to children's clothing that needed letting out as they grew. She worked carefully, precisely, taking pride in every straight seam and invisible mend. This was honest labor, and every coin she earned felt clean in a way that money had not felt clean for a very long time. Kade Northwood brought his saddle blanket in the next day, as Mrs. Sullivan had suggested, and Clara examined the long tear in the thick wool fabric. "This can be repaired," she told him, running her fingers along the damaged edge. "It will not look pretty, but it will hold strong, which I imagine is more important to you than appearance." "You imagine right," he said, and when she glanced up, he was almost smiling. "Thank you, Mrs. Kingston. I appreciate your help. When should I come back for it?" "Give me 3 days. I have several other projects ahead of yours, but I will have it ready by then." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Sullivan mentioned you are a widow. I am sorry for your loss." Clara's heart lurched, but she kept her expression serene, sorrowful. "Thank you, Mr. Northwood. It has been difficult, but one must continue on. Must one not?" "One must," he agreed, and something in his eyes made her wonder what losses he had known, what sorrows had taught him that particular truth. She repaired his saddle blanket with extra care, her stitches strong and even, reinforcing the torn area so it would withstand many more years of hard use. When he came to collect it, he examined her work with obvious approval, running his work-roughened hands over the repair. "This is excellent work, Mrs. Kingston. You have saved me the cost of a new blanket, and this old one has a few more years in it now, I think. What do I owe you?" She named a modest price, and he paid without hesitation, adding an extra coin. "For the quality of the work," he said when she tried to protest, "and because I wonder if I might impose on you for something else. I have a good coat, wore it to church and to town for years, but it has torn at the shoulder seam. I tried to mend it myself, but I only made it worse. Would you have time to look at it?" "Of course, Mr. Northwood. Bring it in whenever is convenient for you." He brought the coat in 2 days later, and Clara could not help smiling when she saw his attempted repair. He had been truthful about his lack of skill with a needle. The stitches were large and uneven, puckering the fabric in a way that would have been comical if it were not clear how hard he had tried. She carefully removed his stitches and repaired the seam properly, and when he came to collect it the following week, he tried it on right there in the store. It fit him perfectly, emphasizing his broad shoulders and tall frame, and Clara had to look away from how handsome he appeared. "You are a miracle worker, Mrs. Kingston," he said, admiration clear in his voice. "I cannot thank you enough. This was my father's coat, and it means a great deal to me to be able to wear it again." Something about that admission, the vulnerability in it, made Clara's throat tight. "I am glad I could help restore it for you, Mr. Northwood. It is a fine coat, and it should last you many more years now." After that, he seemed to find reasons to come into town more often. He needed buttons replaced on a shirt. He had a tear in his work jacket. He wanted to know if Clara could make him some new neckerchiefs from fabric he had purchased. Each visit was brief and businesslike, but Clara found herself looking forward to them in a way that alarmed her. She could not afford to develop feelings for anyone, especially not a good, honest man like Kade Northwood. Her entire presence in Medicine Bow was built on lies, and the moment anyone discovered the truth about her past, everything she was building would come crashing down. But she could not seem to help the way her heart lifted when she heard his deep voice in the store, or the way she found herself taking extra care with anything she sewed for him, wanting it to be perfect. She told herself it was simply professional pride, but she knew she was lying to herself just as thoroughly as she was lying to everyone else. October arrived, bringing cold winds down from the mountains and the first real snow. Clara purchased wool fabric and made herself a warm cloak, and Mrs. Sullivan insisted she also needed a heavier dress for the winter months ahead. "Wyoming winters are not to be taken lightly, Rochigny," the older woman warned. "You will need proper warm clothing, or you will spend December through March frozen solid." Clara was working on her new dress one afternoon when the bell above the door chimed, and a woman she had not met before entered the store. She was about Clara's age, perhaps 24 or 25, dressed in an expensive traveling suit that spoke of money and refined taste. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged, and her blue eyes swept the store with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to judging and finding things wanting. "Good afternoon," Mrs. Sullivan said, coming from the back room. "Welcome to Medicine Bow. Are you just passing through, or can we help you find something?" I am looking for Kade Northwood, the woman said, her voice cultured and precise. I was told in town that he comes here frequently. I am Victoria Hamilton from Cheyenne. My father owns the Hamilton Banking Company, and we have business with Mr. Northwood regarding his ranch. Clara kept her eyes on her sewing, but every nerve in her body was suddenly alert. She told herself she had no right to feel the sharp stab of something that felt suspiciously like jealousy, but she felt it anyway. Mr. Northwood usually comes to town on Saturdays, Mrs. Sullivan said pleasantly. Today is only Wednesday. You might find him at his ranch about 6 miles north of here, but I am not certain he is expecting visitors. He is not expecting me, Victoria said with a small, knowing smile. I thought I would surprise him. We were quite close, you see, before I went east for finishing school 3 years ago. Now that I have returned, I find myself eager to renew old acquaintances. She purchased a few items, small things that seemed more like an excuse to linger than actual needs, and asked several more questions about Kade before finally leaving. The moment the door closed behind her, Mrs. Sullivan shook her head. That is Andrew Hamilton's daughter, all right. She set her cap at Kade years ago, but he never seemed particularly interested. And then she went off to Boston or New York or wherever it was. I am surprised to see her back in Wyoming. I thought she found our humble territory too rough for her refined tastes. Clara said nothing, focusing on her stitches with unnecessary intensity. It did not matter to her if some wealthy banker's daughter was pursuing Kade Northwood. It should not matter. She had no claim on him, no right to care about his personal life, and yet she found herself wondering what he had thought of Victoria Hamilton, whether he would welcome her attention now that she had returned. She had her answer 2 days later when Kade came into the store, his expression showing clear signs of frustration. He nodded to Mrs. Sullivan, and Clara then said, Mrs. Kingston, I was wondering if I might speak with you for a moment. It is a somewhat delicate matter. Clara's heart began to race with immediate fear. Had he somehow learned the truth about her? Was he here to confront her? To expose her lies? She set down her sewing with hands that trembled slightly and followed him to a quiet corner of the store. I apologize for being so mysterious, he said, keeping his voice low. The truth is, I find myself in an awkward situation, and I'm hoping you might be willing to help me. There is a woman, Victoria Hamilton, who has recently returned to the area, and she has made it quite clear that she expects me to court her. Her father has been pressuring me as well, suggesting that a marriage between us would be advantageous for my ranch, that his bank would be willing to extend me favorable loans for expansion. But I have no interest in marrying Victoria Hamilton or anyone else at the moment, and I dislike feeling manipulated into something I do not want. Relief flooded through Clara so intensely that she felt dizzy. I am not certain how I can help you with such a personal matter, Mr. Northwood. He looked uncomfortable, his hat turning in his hands. I was thinking that if people believed I was already courting someone, Victoria and her father might accept that I'm not available and leave me be. I realize this is a great deal to ask, and I would understand completely if you refuse, but would you consider allowing me to call on you? Not genuinely, of course. I mean no disrespect to your late husband's memory. But perhaps if we were seen together on a few occasions, taking a walk or attending church together, it would be enough to discourage her attentions. I would, of course, compensate you for the inconvenience. Clara stared at him, her mind racing. This was dangerous. The more time she spent with Kade Northwood, the more risk there was that he would ask questions she could not answer, that he would begin to see through the careful fiction she had constructed. But at the same time, something in her leapt at the chance to spend time with him, even if it was only pretend. You do not need to compensate me, Mr. Northwood, she heard herself saying. If you need help discouraging unwanted attention, I suppose I can understand that. I have had some experience with persistent suitors myself. This was not exactly a lie. She had certainly dealt with persistent men, though suitor was far too polite a word for most of them. His face brightened with obvious relief. Thank you, Mrs. Kingston. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this. Perhaps we could take a walk this Sunday after church? Just long enough for people to see us together and begin to talk. That would be acceptable, Clara agreed, wondering what on earth she was getting herself into. Sunday arrived cold and clear, the sky so blue it hurt to look at it directly. Clara wore her best dress, a deep green wool that she had remade from an older garment, and her warmest cloak. She had been attending church services each week since arriving in Medicine Bow, sitting quietly in the back and speaking to no one more than necessary. Today, when Kade Northwood entered the small church building and came directly to sit beside her, she could feel every eye in the congregation swivel toward them with undisguised curiosity. Victoria Hamilton was there, seated near the front with her parents, and Clara saw the moment the other woman noticed Kade's presence beside her. Victoria's face tightened with something that might have been anger or might have been determination, and she made a point of turning around several times during the service to study them with calculating eyes. After the service ended, Kade offered Clara his arm. "Might I walk you home, Mrs. Kingston?" "That would be lovely, Mr. Northwood," she replied, and they made their way out into the bright autumn morning while half the town watched with interest. They walked slowly down Medicine Bow's main street, Clara's hand resting lightly on Kade's arm. She was acutely aware of him beside her, of his height and strength, of the way he shortened his stride to match hers. For several minutes, neither of them spoke, and Clara found herself relaxing into the comfortable silence. "I am sorry for putting you in this position," Kade said finally. "I realize it may cause you some discomfort, having people speculate about your personal life." "It is all right," Clara said. "I understand wanting to discourage someone who will not take no for an answer. Some people believe that persistence will eventually wear down resistance, and they refuse to accept that no means no. You sound as though you are speaking from experience." Clara chose her words carefully. "I have known men who refuse to respect my wishes. Yes, it is not a pleasant experience." "I am sorry you have had to deal with that," Kade said, and the genuine sympathy in his voice made her chest tighten. No one should have to fight to have their boundaries respected. They walked in silence for another few moments, and then Kade said, "Would you tell me about your husband? How long were you married?" Clara's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady as she delivered the lies she had rehearsed. 3 years. He was a good man, hard-working. He died in a mining accident outside of Denver. There was nothing that could be done. He was killed instantly." "That must have been terrible for you." "It was very difficult," Clara said, which was true enough, though not for the reasons Kade would imagine. The difficult part had been the years leading up to her fictional husband's death, the things she had been forced to do to survive after her father died and left her with nothing but debts. "But I have learned that one must continue on, as you said. Grief is a luxury I could not afford for long." "You are very brave," Kade said, and Clara had to bite her tongue against the urge to tell him that he was wrong, that she was a liar and a fraud and not brave at all. They reached the general store, and Kade released her arm. "Thank you again for your help, Mrs. Kingston. I hope I have not caused you too much trouble." "Not at all, Mr. Northwood. I hope your plan works, and Miss Hamilton accepts that you are not interested." But Victoria Hamilton did not accept it, as became clear over the following weeks. She began appearing in town more frequently, always elegantly dressed, always finding excuses to speak to Kade when he came in for supplies or to conduct business. She was unfailingly polite to Clara, but there was steel beneath the politeness, a clear message that she considered Clara an obstacle to be removed rather than a real rival for Kade's affections. Kade, for his part, continued his pretense of courting Clara, coming to town on Sundays to walk with her after church, occasionally bringing her small gifts like fresh eggs from his chickens or a haunch of venison from a deer he had shot. Clara knew it was all an act, knew that he was simply maintaining the fiction they had created, but she could not help the way her heart responded to his attention. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments during her work, wondering what he was doing, whether he was safe, whether he was warm enough in the increasingly cold weather. November brought serious snow, and with it came an invitation that Clara knew she should refuse but found herself accepting anyway. Kade came into the store on a Saturday afternoon, stomping snow from his boots, and asked if she would like to come out to his ranch for Sunday dinner. "I know it is not entirely proper, you visiting my home unchaperoned," he said, "but I thought you might enjoy seeing the ranch, and I promise to be a perfect gentleman. I have been practicing my cooking, and I make a decent roast chicken, if you can believe that." Clara should have said no. Every instinct for self-preservation she had developed over the past 3 years told her that spending time alone with Kade was dangerous, that the more she let herself care about him, the more it would hurt when the truth inevitably came out. But she heard herself saying yes, heard herself agreeing to let him pick her up in his wagon after church the next day. The ride out to his ranch took nearly an hour, the wagon jolting over frozen ruts in the road. But Clara found she did not mind. The landscape was beautiful in its starkness. The snow-covered plains stretching away toward the mountains, everything clean and white and new. Kade talked as he drove, pointing out landmarks, telling her stories about the area, about the early settlers who had carved out lives in this harsh country. His ranch was modest but well kept. A sturdy log house with a barn and several outbuildings, corrals holding a dozen horses, and what looked like at least 50 head of cattle in the near pasture. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they pulled up to the house, a large yellow dog came bounding out to greet them, tail wagging furiously. "That is Buck," Kade said, reaching down to scratch the dog's ears. "He is supposed to be a working dog, but he is so friendly he would probably help rustlers load my cattle if they gave him a kind word." Clara laughed and realized it had been a very long time since she had laughed so freely. She climbed down from the wagon, and Buck immediately transferred his attention to her, pressing against her legs and gazing up at her with adoring brown eyes. "He likes you," Kade observed. "That is a good sign. Buck is an excellent judge of character." The interior of Cade's house was as neat and well-maintained as the exterior. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth, and shelves lined with books. It was a bachelor's home, functional and spare, but there were small touches that spoke of a man who cared about his surroundings. Curtains on the windows, though simply made. A colorful blanket folded over the back of the rocking chair. A vase on the table that held dried wildflowers. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Kade said, gesturing toward the rocking chair. "I need to check on dinner. I put the chicken in before I left for church this morning, so it should be nearly ready." Clara sat down, and Buck immediately laid his large head on her lap, gazing up at her with hopeful eyes. She stroked his soft ears and watched as Kade moved around his small kitchen, checking the oven, stirring something on the stove. He moved with the same economical grace he brought to everything, no wasted motion, everything done with quiet competence. They ate at the table near the fire, and Clara was surprised to discover that Kade was an excellent cook. The chicken was perfectly roasted, the potatoes crispy on the outside and fluffy inside, the vegetables seasoned just right. She told him so, and he looked pleased. "My mother taught me," he said. "She insisted that I learn to cook properly, said that no man should be helpless in his own kitchen. I was 14 when she and my father died, old enough to survive on my own. But there were many times during those first few years when I was grateful for the skills she had given me." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Kade agreed, his expression distant with memory. "Both my parents were good people. I like to think I'm running this ranch in a way that would make them proud." After dinner, Kade showed her around the property, bundled in their warm coats against the cold. He introduced her to his horses, clearly his pride and joy, pointing out their good points and bloodlines with the enthusiasm of someone who truly loved his work. He showed her the barn where he kept his equipment, the hen house where his chickens huddled against the cold, the smokehouse where he cured meat for the winter. Standing in the barn, surrounded by the warm smell of hay and horses, listening to Kade talk about his plans for the spring and the foals he hoped his mares would produce, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. This was real. This man. This life. This place. It was all honest and real and good in a way that nothing in her life had been real for years, and she wanted it so badly that it physically hurt. This life she could never truly have because she did not deserve it, because she had lied to get here, because if Kade ever knew the truth about her, he would look at her with disgust instead of the warmth she saw in his eyes now. On the ride back to town, As the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink behind the mountains, Clara was quiet, struggling with emotions she could not name. Kade must have sensed her mood because he did not try to force conversation, simply let her sit with her thoughts while the wagon rolled steadily along the frozen road. When they reached Medicine Bow and Kade helped her down from the wagon in front of the general store, he said quietly, "Thank you for coming today, Clara. I know we started this whole thing as a pretense, but I want you to know that I genuinely enjoyed your company. You are welcome at the ranch anytime." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep voice did something to her insides. "I enjoyed it too, Kade. Very much. May I ask you something?" He had not released her hand yet, and Clara was achingly aware of the warmth of his fingers through their gloves. "Of course. Why did you really come to Medicine Bow? I do not mean to pry, and you do not have to answer if you do not want to, but sometimes I get the feeling that you are running from something, or maybe towards something. I am not certain which." Clara's breath caught. She should have expected this. Kade was observant and intelligent, and she had known it was only a matter of time before he began to question her story. She chose her words with extreme care. "Perhaps a little of both," she said slowly. "After my husband died, there was nothing keeping me in Colorado. I had no family left, no ties to bind me there. Medicine Bow seemed like a place where I could start fresh, where I could be myself without the weight of the past hanging over me. And have you found that here? The fresh start you were looking for?" "I am beginning to think I might have," Clara said honestly. "But fresh starts are fragile things, Kade. They require the present to be strong enough to outweigh the past, and I am not certain mine is quite there yet." He studied her face in the gathering darkness, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing far more than she wanted him to see. But all he said was, "Well, if you need help making your present stronger, I hope you will let me know." Friends help each other, do they not? "Friends?" Clara repeated softly. "Yes, friends help each other." She went to sleep that night with tears on her pillow, crying for reasons she could not quite articulate. For the life she wished she could have, for the honesty she could not give, for the good man who deserved so much better than a woman built of lies. December arrived with a vengeance, bringing blizzards that shut down the town for days at a time. Clara worked by lamplight in her small room, sewing steadily while snow piled up outside her window. She had more work than she could handle now, as women prepared clothing for Christmas and the winter dances that would break up the monotony of the cold months. Her savings were growing steadily, and she allowed herself to dream just a little about what she might do with them. Perhaps eventually she could open her own shop. Perhaps she could build something permanent here, something that belonged entirely to her. Kade came to town whenever the weather allowed, and their pretend courtship gradually became something that felt less and less like pretending. They took walks together on clear days, bundled in scarves and coats. They attended church together every Sunday. He came to her room once and sat quietly while she sewed, reading aloud from a book of poems he had brought with him, his deep voice making the words come alive in a way that made Clara's heart ache. Victoria Hamilton continued to appear regularly in town, always perfectly dressed, always making a point of speaking to Kade, but Clara could see that her confidence was beginning to crack. Whatever she had expected when she returned to Wyoming, it clearly had not been watching the man she wanted courting someone else. She began making small, cutting remarks to Clara, nothing overt enough to be called rude, but enough to make her discomfort known. "It must be quite different for you here, Mrs. Kingston," Victoria said one day in the general store, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Coming from a mining town in Colorado, I imagine Medicine Bow seems positively refined in comparison." Clara kept her voice level. "I find Medicine Bow has everything I need, Miss Hamilton. Sometimes less is more, as they say." "How philosophical, and so brave of you to start fresh in a new place after such a tragedy. Though I suppose when one has limited options, one must take what opportunities present themselves, must one not?" The implication was clear. Victoria thought Clara was a fortune hunter, pursuing Kade for his ranch, for the security he could provide. It would have been laughable if it were not so close to exposing Clara's desperation, her need for respectability, for a safe place to reinvent herself. I suppose we all must make the choices we feel are best for us, Clara replied carefully, and live with the consequences of those choices, whatever they may be. Christmas came, and with it came an invitation to a dance at the town hall, organized by the Ladies' Aid Society to raise money for a new school building. Clara had made herself a new dress for the occasion, a dark blue wool with a modest neckline and simple trim. She felt almost pretty when she looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, her dark hair arranged in a simple style, her cheeks flushed with anticipation. Kade arrived to collect her in his wagon, cleaned and brushed until it shone, wearing his father's good coat that Clara had repaired. He looked so handsome that Clara felt her breath catch, and when he smiled at her, she had to remind herself sternly that this was still just pretend, that she could not let herself fall completely for this good, honest man who thought she was someone she was not. The dance was held in the town's largest building, and it seemed like everyone from Medicine Bow and the surrounding ranches had come. Lamps hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the crowd. A small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar in one corner, and the smell of punch and cookies filled the air. Kade led Clara onto the dance floor, and she found herself in his arms, one of his hands warm and strong at her waist, the other holding hers carefully. She had learned to dance years ago in what felt like another lifetime, and her body remembered the steps even if her heart was pounding hard enough to make her dizzy. They danced 3 dances in a row, neither of them speaking, simply moving together to the music. Clara could feel every eye in the room on them, could sense the speculation and gossip spreading like ripples in a pond. She saw Victoria Hamilton standing near the wall, her face rigid with poorly concealed fury, and she felt a moment of sympathy for the other woman. How terrible it must be to want something so badly and watch it slip away. But then Kade pulled her slightly closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through her dress, and Clara stopped thinking about Victoria at all. She stopped thinking about anything except the feeling of being held, of being close to someone who made her feel safe in a way she had not felt safe since before her father died and left her alone in the world. "Clara," Kade said quietly, his mouth close to her ear so she could hear him over the music, "I need to tell you something." Her heart lurched. "What is it?" "This stopped being pretend for me weeks ago. I know we agreed to help each other, to put on a show for Victoria and the town. But somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending. I care about you, Clara. I care about you a great deal, and if there is any chance that you might feel the same way, I would like to court you for real this time. Properly. With honorable intention." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This was what she wanted, what she had been secretly hoping for even while telling herself it was impossible. But it was also the thing she feared most, because real courtship led to real questions, to real intimacy, to the possibility of a real future. And she could not build a real future on a foundation of lies. "Kade," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are things about me you do not know, things I have not told you." "Then tell me," he said simply. "Whatever it is, Clara, whatever you are afraid of, tell me." But the music was ending, and other people were pressing close, and Mrs. Sullivan was approaching with a plate of cookies and a bright smile. The moment passed, and Clara was left with her heart racing and her confession locked behind her teeth. The evening continued, and Clara danced with other men, neighbors, and ranchers who asked politely and were perfectly pleasant, but all she could think about was Kade's words. He wanted to court her for real. He cared about her. And she was going to have to tell him the truth and watch everything she had built come crashing down. On the wagon ride home, wrapped in blankets against the bitter cold, Kade tried to return to the conversation they had started during the dance. "Clara, about what I said earlier. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable. If you do not feel the same way, I will understand, and we can go back to just being friends. I value your friendship, and I would not want to lose it." "It is not that I do not feel the same way," Clara said, her words coming out in clouds of steam in the frigid air. "I do feel the same way, Kade. But there are things you do not know about me, about my past, and I'm afraid that when you learn the truth, you will not want anything to do with me." "Why do you not let me be the judge of that?" Kade asked gently. "Whatever you think is so terrible, Clara, I doubt it is as bad as you fear." Clara almost laughed at that, a bitter sound that had no humor in it. "You do not know what I have done. Kade, you do not know the person I was before I came here. So tell me. Whatever it is, tell me, and we will deal with it together." They had reached the general store, and Kade pulled the wagon to a stop. Clara sat there for a long moment, gathering her courage, knowing that once she spoke the words, everything would change. But she could not build anything real with Kade while standing on a foundation of lies. If she truly cared about him, she owed him the truth. "I was not married," she said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush. "There was no husband who died in a mining accident. That was a lie I told to make myself seem respectable. The truth is that when my father died 5 years ago, he left me with nothing but debts. I tried to find honest work, but there was nothing available for a young woman alone. I was desperate, Kade. I was going to be thrown out onto the street, so I made a choice. I went to work in a saloon in Denver, not serving drinks, though I did that too. I did other things, things that women do not speak about in polite company, things that I'm deeply ashamed of. I did that for nearly 3 years, saving every penny I could, until I had enough to leave and start over. I came here and lied about who I was because I wanted a chance at a respectable life, at being someone decent. But I'm not decent, Kade. I am a liar and a fraud. And you deserve so much better than me." The silence that followed her confession seemed to stretch on forever. Clara could not bring herself to look at Kade's face, could not bear to see the disgust and contempt she knew she would find there. She gathered her skirts, preparing to climb down from the wagon and disappear into the store to pack her bags and leave Medicine Bow before dawn because she could not face staying now that he knew the truth. But then Kade's hand closed gently over hers, stopping her. "Clara, look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, bracing for the rejection she knew was coming. But what she saw in his face was not disgust or contempt. It was something softer, something that looked almost like compassion. "Do you think you're the only person who has done things they are ashamed of?" Kade asked quietly. "Do you think you are the only person who has had to make impossible choices in order to survive? Clara, I do not care about your past. I care about the woman you are now, the woman I have come to know over these past months. You are kind and hardworking and brave, and nothing you did before you came here changes that." Clara felt tears spilling down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. "But I lied to you. I lied to everyone." "You protected yourself," Kade corrected gently. "You did what you needed to do to have a chance at the life you deserved. There's no shame in that, Clara, not in my eyes." "You should be disgusted with me," Clara whispered. "Any decent man would be disgusted with me." "Then perhaps I am not as decent as you think," Kade said with a slight smile. "Or perhaps I simply understand that life is not as simple as the rules society likes to pretend it is, Clara. I grew up in this territory. I have seen good people forced into bad situations. I have seen what desperation can drive a person to do, and I have learned not to judge people for the choices they made to survive. What matters to me is who you are now, what you choose to do with the fresh start you have created for yourself. And from what I have seen, you are choosing to be a good person, a woman of integrity and skill and kindness. That is what matters to me." "I do not understand," Clara said, shaking her head in confusion. "Why are you not angry? Why are you not telling me to leave?" "Because I care about you," Kade said simply. "Because the past is the past, and I would rather focus on the future. Because I think you have judged yourself far more harshly than you deserve. And because I meant what I said earlier, I want to court you, Clara Kingston. I want to build something real with you if you will let me." Clara could barely breathe. "You truly do not care about what I was? About what I did?" "I truly do not care," Kade confirmed. "Your past is your own, Clara. If you want to tell me more about it someday, I will listen. but you do not owe me your painful memories. What you owe me if you decide to give this a chance is honesty from here forward. Can you promise me that?" "Yes," Clara said, the word coming out on a sob. "Yes, I can promise you that." Kade reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "Then that is all I need. Now let me walk you to your door before you freeze solid out here." He helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door of the general store, and when they reached it, Clara turned to face him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for not judging me. Thank you for being kinder than I deserve. You deserve kindness, Clara. You deserve respect and safety and a chance at happiness. Never doubt that." He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, so tender that it made Clara's heart ache. "Good night. I will see you on Sunday." Clara went upstairs to her room and collapsed onto her bed, sobbing into her pillow with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had told him the truth, the awful truth that she had been so certain would destroy everything, and he had not rejected her. He had not been disgusted or angry. He had simply accepted her, past and all, and told her that it did not matter. It seemed impossible. It seemed too good to be true. But Kade had never lied to her, had never been anything but honest and straightforward, and Clara found herself daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she had dreamed of. Maybe she could have a future here, with this good man who saw her as she was and cared about her anyway. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. Kade courted her properly, calling on her on Sunday afternoons, taking her for drives when the weather allowed, bringing her small gifts that showed he was paying attention to her likes and preferences. A book of poetry because she had mentioned loving to read. A warm shawl he had purchased in Cheyenne because her old one was wearing thin. A jar of honey from his bees because she had said she liked it in her tea. They talked for hours, sitting in Mrs. Sullivan's parlor with the older woman serving as a discreet chaperone, or walking through the snow-covered streets of Medicine Bow. Kade told her about his childhood, about his parents, and the lessons they had taught him. About the hard years after they died, when he was little more than a boy trying to run a ranch alone. About the satisfaction he found in working the land, in breeding good horses, in building something lasting. Clara found herself opening up as well, telling him things she had never told anyone. About her father, who had been a clerk in a mining company office until the company went bankrupt and he lost everything. About the months after he died, when she tried desperately to find work, any work, and discovered that the world had little use for a young woman with no skills and no family to protect her. About the shame and fear and desperation that had driven her to make the choices she made. "I am not proud of what I did," she told him one afternoon in late January, as they sat in Mrs. Sullivan's parlor with cups of tea growing cold on the table between them. "But I'm not certain I regret it either. Those choices kept me alive. They gave me the means to escape, and they led me here, to Medicine Bow, to you. If I had to go through all of that to get to where I am now, then perhaps it was worth it." "I am glad you are here," Kade said, reaching across to take her hand. "I am glad you survived. I am glad you were strong enough to do whatever it took to give yourself a future. That takes courage, Clara, more courage than most people will ever have to find." Victoria Hamilton made one last attempt to win Kade's attention in February, appearing at his ranch uninvited and making it clear that she was willing to overlook his lack of interest if he would just give her a chance. Kade told Clara about it later, his expression somewhere between amused and exasperated. "I was as polite as I could be," he said, "but I told her plainly that I'm courting you with serious intentions and that she needs to accept that and move on. Her father tried to pressure me one more time about loans and expansion, but I told him I have no interest in dealing with his bank. I think they have finally accepted that I mean what I say." "I almost feel sorry for her," Clara admitted. "She is not a bad person, just someone who is used to getting what she wants." "She will survive," Kade said dryly, "and she will find someone else to focus her attentions on, I have no doubt. Victoria Hamilton is nothing if not determined." March brought the first hints of spring, and with it came a conversation that Clara had been both hoping for and dreading. Cade came to call on a Sunday afternoon, and Clara could tell immediately that he was nervous about something. He kept turning his hat in his hands, starting to speak, and then stopping, clearly trying to find the right words. "Clara," he finally said, "we have been courting for 3 months now, and I think you know how I feel about you. I care about you deeply. I respect you. I admire your strength and your honesty and your skill, and I would very much like to marry you, if you will have me." Clara's heart leapt into her throat. She had known this was coming, had been preparing for it, but actually hearing the words made everything suddenly brilliantly real. "I know I do not have much to offer," Cade continued, apparently taking her silence as hesitation. "The ranch does well enough, but it is not a grand place. You would be a rancher's wife, which means hard work and long days and sometimes lonely weeks when I'm out with the cattle, but I would do everything in my power to make you happy, Clara. I would be faithful and honest and true. I would never raise my hand to you or speak to you with disrespect, and I would never, ever judge you for your past or throw it in your face. Whatever happened before you came to Medicine Bow stays in the past. If you marry me, we start fresh, together, as equals. What do you say?" Clara realized she was crying again, but this time they were tears of joy rather than pain. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Cade, I will marry you. I would be honored to be your wife." The smile that spread across Cade's face was brighter than the spring sun breaking through winter clouds. He stood and pulled her up from her chair, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and gentle against hers, his arms strong around her waist. Clara melted into him, into the kiss, into the promise of a future she had never dared to truly hope for. They were married in April of 1879, in the small church in Medicine Bow with Mrs. Sullivan and half the town in attendance. Clara wore a dress she had made herself, a beautiful cream-colored creation with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Cade wore his father's good coat and looked so handsome that Clara's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, the words of the service taking on profound meaning as Clara promised to love and honor this man who had accepted her so completely. When Cade slipped a simple gold ring onto her finger, Clara felt the last of her fear and shame finally fall away. She was Clara Northwood now, a rancher's wife, a woman with a future built on love and honesty rather than lies and desperation. The wedding breakfast was held at the hotel, and nearly everyone in Medicine Bow came to wish them well. Victoria Hamilton was notably absent, having finally left for Cheyenne the previous week, apparently accepting defeat at last. Mrs. Sullivan cried happy tears and told Clara that she had known from the first that she and Cade were meant for each other. Several of the ranch wives welcomed Clara to their circle and promised to teach her everything she needed to know about being a rancher's wife. As the sun set, Cade drove Clara out to the ranch that was now her home. She had visited many times over the winter and spring, but arriving as his wife felt different, felt permanent in a way that made her heart swell with happiness. Buck bounded out to greet them, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook, and Cade laughed and told him that Clara was here to stay now, that she was part of the family. Inside the house, a fire burned warmly in the hearth, and Clara looked around at what was now her home. Cade came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Clara answered honestly. "I still cannot quite believe this is real, that you are real, that someone like you exists who could love someone like me." "Someone like you," Cade repeated, turning her in his arms so he could see her face. "You mean someone strong and brave and beautiful and skilled?" "Yes, Clara, I love you. I love everything about you, including the strength it took to survive what you survived and come out the other side still believing you deserved better. Never doubt that you deserve this, deserve happiness, deserve love. You do." That night, as Clara lay in her husband's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, the desperate years in Denver, the fear and shame and determination, the lies she had told to get a fresh start, the truth she had been so afraid to reveal, and Cade's acceptance, his love, his refusal to let her past define her future. She had been so certain that her past would destroy any chance at happiness, that the moment anyone learned the truth, she would be cast out, rejected, condemned. But Cade had proven her wrong. He had looked at her whole story, all of it, and chosen to love her anyway. He had given her the gift of true acceptance, of being seen and known and loved, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. All of it. Every messy and painful and complicated part. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Cade asked sleepily, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. "For not caring about my past. For loving me anyway. For giving me a future." "You gave yourself a future, Clara. You were brave enough to leave and start over. All I did was recognize what I was seeing when I looked at you, and what I saw was a woman worth knowing, worth caring about, worth spending the rest of my life with." The years that followed were full of the hard work and simple joys that defined ranch life. Clara learned to cook for a working ranch, to tend the chickens and the garden, to help with the horses when Cade needed an extra pair of hands. She continued her sewing, taking on projects from the ranch wives who became her friends, enjoying the work and the income it brought. In the winter of 1880, Clara gave birth to their first child, a strong, healthy boy they named James after Cade's father. Cade was beside himself with joy, cradling his son with a tenderness that made Clara fall in love with him all over again. 2 years later, their daughter Sarah was born, and then 3 years after that, another son they named Matthew. The ranch prospered under Cade's careful management and Clara's steady partnership. They expanded slowly, carefully, never overextending themselves, building something solid and lasting. Cade's horses gained a reputation for quality throughout the territory, and buyers came from as far away as Colorado to purchase his stock. Clara's past was never spoken of in Medicine Bow. Whether anyone suspected the truth behind her carefully constructed story, she never knew. And as the years passed, it mattered less and less. She was Mrs. Northwood, the rancher's wife, respected in the community for her skill with a needle and her kindness to her neighbors. The frightened, desperate young woman she had been in Denver felt like someone from another lifetime, someone she barely recognized anymore. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and she and Cade sat together by the fire, Clara would think about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the fear and shame and desperation, the lies she had told, the truth she had been so afraid to reveal, and the extraordinary grace of this man who had looked at her whole story and loved her anyway. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Cade one night, perhaps 10 years into their marriage. "Marrying me, I mean. Taking on a wife with such a complicated past?" Cade looked up from the harness he was repairing, his expression genuinely surprised. "Regret it? Clara, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You have given me 3 beautiful children, a home that is warm and welcoming, and partnership in everything I do. Why on earth would I regret that?" "Because of what I was," Clara said quietly, "because I was not pure and innocent like wives are supposed to be." Cade set down his work and came to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Clara, listen to me. I need you to hear this and believe it. Your past does not define you. It never has, and it never will. You were forced into an impossible situation, and you survived it with your spirit intact. That is something to be proud of, not ashamed of. And as for purity and innocence, well, I have never cared much for those things anyway. What I care about is honesty and loyalty and love, and you have given me all of those in abundance. I am the luckiest man in Wyoming, and I thank God every day that you came to Medicine Bow and gave me the chance to love you." Clara pulled him close, holding him tight, letting his love and acceptance wash over her like a benediction. She had been so certain that her past would destroy any chance at happiness, But Kade had proven to her over and over again that love was stronger than shame, that acceptance was more powerful than judgment, that who she had become mattered far more than who she had been. Their children grew up strong and healthy, learning the rhythms of ranch life, unaware of the journey their mother had taken to arrive at this place of peace and security. James showed his father's gift with horses, able to gentle even the wildest colt with patience and understanding. Sarah had inherited Clara's skill with a needle and spent hours by her mother's side learning to sew beautiful things. Matthew was still young, but he showed signs of being a scholar, constantly asking questions about everything he saw, eager to understand how the world worked. Clara taught her children to work hard, to be kind, to value honesty above all things. She never told them about her past, about the desperate years in Denver, but she hoped that the lessons she had learned would somehow be passed to them, that they would understand that people were more than their worst moments, that survival sometimes required difficult choices, that compassion and acceptance were worth more than judgment and condemnation. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kade surprised Clara with a trip to Cheyenne. They left the children with Mrs. Sullivan, who was still spry and active despite her advancing years, and took the train east for a week in the territorial capital. It was the first time Clara had been away from the ranch and the children for more than a day or two, and she felt simultaneously guilty and excited. Cheyenne had grown considerably since Clara had passed through it on her way to Medicine Bow 2 decades earlier. There were new buildings, new businesses, even electric lights on some of the main streets. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, attended a theater performance, and spent long hours just walking through the city together, hand in hand like newlyweds. On their last evening in Cheyenne, as they were preparing to return to Medicine Bow the next morning, Kade presented Clara with a gift. It was a beautiful shawl, far finer than anything she would have purchased for herself, made of soft wool in a rich burgundy color that complemented her complexion perfectly. "Thank you," Clara said, running her hands over the fine fabric. "It is beautiful, Kade, but you did not need to buy me anything. This trip has been gift enough." "I wanted to," Kade said simply. "You have worked so hard for 20 years, Clara. You have raised our children and helped me build the ranch and been my partner in everything. You deserve beautiful things. You deserve to be celebrated, and I wanted you to have something to remember this trip, to remember that you are loved and valued and cherished." Clara felt tears prick her eyes even after all these years, still moved by this man's steadfast devotion. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you so much, Kade. Thank you for loving me back. Thank you for not caring about where I came from, only about where we were going together." "Always," Kade promised, pulling her into his arms. "Always, Clara, you and me, together, for the rest of our lives. That is all I need." They returned to Medicine Bow the next day, to the ranch and the children and the life they had built together. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons, by births and deaths and celebrations and sorrows. Mrs. Sullivan passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, and Clara cried at her funeral, remembering the kindness of the woman who had given her a chance when she needed it most. The children grew up and began to forge their own paths. James married a nice girl from a neighboring ranch and started building a herd of his own on land Kade helped him purchase. Sarah married a teacher who had come to Medicine Bow to run the new school, and they settled in town, where Sarah opened a dress shop that quickly became successful. Matthew went to college back east studying engineering, though he promised to return to Wyoming once his education was complete. Clara and Kade grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving a bit slower, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, their legacy extending far beyond the ranch they had built, encompassing the family they had created and the love they had nurtured. On a summer evening in 1904, Clara and Kade sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains they had loved for so many years. They were both in their 60s now, their working days largely behind them, the ranch now run primarily by James and his sons. But they were content, sitting together in companionable silence, holding hands the way they had for more than 2 decades. "Do you remember the first time I brought you out here?" Kade asked, his thumb moving idly over the back of Clara's hand. "That Sunday dinner, back in 1878? "I remember," Clara said softly. "I remember thinking that your life seemed so real, so honest compared to the lies I was living. I remember wanting to be part of it so badly that it hurt, and being certain that I never could be because of what I had been." "And do you remember what I told you when you finally confessed the truth?" "You told me you did not care about my past," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion even after all these years. "You told me that who I had become mattered more than who I had been. You gave me acceptance and love when I was certain I deserved neither." "I gave you what you had always deserved," Kade corrected gently. "What everyone deserves: compassion, understanding, a chance to start over. You took that chance and built something beautiful with it. Clara, you became exactly who you were always meant to be." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body beside hers. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Medicine Bow 26 years earlier, desperate for a fresh start, terrified that her past would destroy her future. She thought about the lies she had told and the truth she had been so afraid to reveal. And she thought about this extraordinary man who had looked at her whole story, all of it, the shameful parts and the strong parts and everything in between, and chosen to love her anyway. "Thank you," she whispered, as she had whispered countless times over the years. "Thank you for not caring about my past. Thank you for loving me anyway. Thank you for giving me a life I never dreamed I could have. Thank you for trusting me with your truth," Kade replied, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for being brave enough to start over. Thank you for choosing to build this life with me. I love you, Clara Northwood. I have loved you from the moment I first saw you in Mrs. Sullivan's store, and I will love you until the day I die." They sat together as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The wind carried the scent of summer grass and distant pine. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied softly. A dog barked in the distance, the sounds of their life, their world, the future Clara had built from the ashes of her past. She had lied about who she was to get a fresh start, had constructed an entire false history to give herself a chance at respectability. But the cowboy who had become her husband had not cared about her past at all. He had seen her for who she truly was, had loved her despite her secrets and shame, had given her the gift of acceptance and a future filled with love. It was more than Clara had ever dared to hope for. It was everything she had never known she needed. And as she sat there beside the man who had changed her life, watching the sun set over the land they loved, Clara Northwood knew that she was finally, completely, truly home. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Clara and Kade celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 40th, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and Clara took pride in watching her legacy extend beyond anything she had imagined possible during those desperate years in Denver. She never forgot where she came from, but she no longer defined herself by it. The frightened girl who had sold herself to survive had become a woman of strength and dignity, respected in her community, loved by her family, secure in the knowledge that she had built something lasting and good. And through it all, Kade remained beside her, constant as the mountains, steady as the seasons, proving every single day that love was stronger than shame, that acceptance mattered more than judgment, that the past was simply prologue to a future worth building together. When Clara Northwood passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, with Kade holding her hand and her children surrounding her bed, she left behind a legacy that had nothing to do with the lies she had told to get a fresh start, and everything to do with the truth of the life she had lived. She left behind a family that loved her, a community that respected her, and a husband who had shown her, through 46 years of steadfast devotion, that she had always been worthy of love, that her past had never defined her, that who she had become was all that mattered. Kade followed her 3 years later, and they were buried side by side in the Medicine Bow Cemetery, their headstones simple but dignified, their names linked together in death as they had been in life. And if anyone in the town remembered the quiet widow who had arrived on the stagecoach so many years before, if anyone suspected that her carefully constructed story had been less than truthful, no one ever said a word. Because Clara Northwood had proven, through the life she lived and the love she gave, that everyone deserves a second chance, that the past does not have to determine the future, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply accepting someone exactly as they are, past and all, and choosing to build something beautiful together.